But you have the capacity. I mean, I've been with you on the streets. That doesn't sound very good.
We didn't get much money, do we? And we haven't repeated it. Yeah?
But you spot the problem. You get the office chair and wheel the person in if it's necessary. Now, not everyone, one has the courage to do that, and two has the ability to see what's necessary under those circumstances.
But equally, I think that there are some wonderful doctors out there who think they're working within the physical sort of world, but are actually working at different levels, and they're not necessarily aware of that.
So in part of your mentoring doctors, which you do a lot of, is that what you point out?
At times, in my working lifetime, I think we've had a huge shift from moving from everything from the physical, and we moved up to the mind level, and the mind and body aren't so split. It's taken quite some time, but I'm not so sure that we're there about the mind, body and spirit. And it's very interesting. I've been very interested in mental health in my working lifetime, and trying to get anything with the word spirit into any guidance, it's really hard. People are happier about having the mind a bit put in, but there's still quite a bit of, well, what's this spirit business, you know, is it science, and what's the evidence for it, really? Which amuses me, because the evidence for lots of medicine is very checkered, really, at the end of the day.
You want to comment on that?
Well, I think that, you know, culturally we had that split made official a few hundred years ago, you know, between the state and body, mind, and everything else as the preserve of the church. So that, you know, well, when was the last time that any of us went to the doctor and said, "Doctor, my spirit is troubled"? You don't go and say that. And if you did, what would the doctor say? The doctor would probably say, "Well, there's a chaplain down the hall, maybe you should go and speak to him, her." But that's the big difference between conventional Western medicine and the traditional wisdom traditions of the Orient and India, because for them it always was part of the same interconnected and interdependent biosystem, and that's the great strength. Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, and that's macro medicine, and the great strength of conventional medicine is a kind of, you know, micro medicine. Now the question is, where and when shall the twain meet? And, you know, hopefully these kinds of dialogues will help, because that's really what needs to happen. And when you get individuals from those two opposing disciplines connecting, the actual level of understanding and of commonality is immense. And, you know, hopefully that's what's going to happen in the Aquarian age.
And it's interesting to me that patients often sort of come in and say, "Oh, how are you feeling? My spirit's very low at the moment." And then, you know, that might get turned into something called depression. But actually, it's not depression. And what was interesting for me, working with lots of different nationalities from all these war-torn areas, was that in a lot of their cultures there is no word for mental health sort of problems. There's no depression or anything. So it was quite liberating not having to sort of confine and constrain it all down into sort of language that they're not used to. And often they'd come in with exactly what you're sort of saying, talking about their energies or channels or whatever. So you'd have to work with that, because they didn't want to hear about what's this word depression, and the interpreters couldn't interpret it anyway. So it's interesting.
Guru and I have both spent, not together, but both spent quite a lot of time in India. And one of the things that is I always recognise there is whenever we meet Ayurvedic type people, shall I say, they recognise us. We don't go out to meet them. They recognise us and invite us, which I always think is fascinating. Because you don't have to make an effort at all. It's like they immediately classify people. You come here, you go there. So by the law of magnetic attraction, they see something in you that makes it very easy, actually.
Well, one of my trainers a long time ago said patients deserve the doctors they get and doctors deserve the patients they get. And I took that as a positive because patients do get attracted to a certain type of doctor and vice versa. And what's that all about?
Hey, you answered that one. Law of magnetic attraction.
Well, that's about that old chestnut, the law of karma, isn't it? You know, whatever our path in life is and whatever our previous story may have been, then what is left is a series of, if you like, incomplete cycles and unfinished business, and the energetic repercussions of that generate, if you like, the people who come and see me and the people who come and see Jude and the people who come and see Les. And it always was like that, it always will be. And as we change and hopefully grow, then the energy of the people coming to see us also changes. And that's the way that all parties have the opportunity to develop and to grow in whatever it is that we do in life. So, you know, the yogic perspective on this is that everything that we perceive as being outside of ourselves is actually a reflection of what is inside, nothing more, nothing less. And so, as that's true for each one of us, or each and every healer, then they all attract different kinds of patients or people.
So what do you both feel about this world of the health service that we're in at the moment? Because, you know, what I'm sort of saying is the ideal. I'm not saying I was like that all of the time, but that's what I aspire to. But it is crazy out there in the health service at the moment, and I know that some of you here are working in it, and it feels like mayhem, and people are very, you know, the professionals are very stressed, and I wonder what that's actually sort of doing to the clients who are coming.
You want to answer that? Shall I?
I'll let you go first, and then if I've got anything to add.
Okay. I think it's hugely sad, but I think sometimes when a system doesn't value its staff, it's better for it to break down and reform than to carry on. Because what's happening at the moment is we are losing our good professionals because they have unreasonable working hours, they're not paid enough, they're not honoured at all, like don't bother to eat by a Mars bar while you're dropping someone off. It's terrible the way we treat people, and until we learn to treat them and honour them for the service they give, they're going to go in droves. And under those circumstances, I think it's right they do. Because then they'll come, hopefully, some of them at least, will come back and get treated well. I think the way we treat the people who serve us is despicable. And most of that is emergency services of one sort or another.
Well, I'd absolutely agree with that. But I think the politics around it are complex because it's been 50, 60 years that it shifted from an operation that was actually very efficient and very well run and considered a globally excellent model, that it has actually been degraded to this point. But I think there's all kinds of unpleasant political agendas behind it, and what started out as being essentially not exactly free healthcare, but almost, it's now being kind of privatized in a way that I don't see is in any way advantageous to the population. In other words, I think it's become it's a cash cow, is what I think.
And it's bad for community health.
Yeah. So whether it needs to completely disintegrate, as you're suggesting, Jude, is a possibility. I mean, it looks to be heading that way. In fact, I think only today, the head of the Royal Society of GPs, she came out and sort of said that junior doctors are striking and should strike. They have to strike for the sake of their own health. Words to that effect. And that's a very, very sad state of affairs. So the kind of pressure that society puts on our own healers is insane. And it's a complete disconnect.
And will reflect in more and more bad mental health.
Yeah.
It's so sad. You had a lot of that, didn't you, Les, with the doctors you were mentoring who were having mental health problems?
Yeah, and I think a lot of doctors retiring early. Most of the junior doctors are thinking about going abroad, and you sort of worry about who's going to be around in another to look after me when I'm a bit more elderly. I think it is. I've never seen it like this, but the system seems really mad. I don't know what everyone sort of feels about that, but it does feel sort of there's something unstoppable happening, but you can't put your finger on it, and it's very uncomfortable and it's very unpleasant for a lot of people who think, I fundamentally think want to get out of bed in the morning to do a good job, but feel frustrated by lots of different sort of pressures. And the patient is the person who's right at the end, when they should really be right at the front.
But it's also the patients, not now they're sick maybe, but when they were well, who subscribed to dishonouring the people who serve.
Well, yeah.
And so maybe we need to do a lot more education at all levels.
Yeah, it's a vicious circle though, isn't it? Because if there's stress in the system, then patients are going to get sort of upset, and you can just see how the wheel goes round really, and it all just sort of get revved up, and professionals are getting very burnt out. I see a lot of doctors still, and they're feeling very tired, definitely unvalued. And they're not good role models for the doctors coming through, because if you ask a lot of junior doctors what you're going to do, and they say, I don't want to end up like that GP who's in that sort of surgery who looks like he's on death's door. I don't want to sort of be like that.
They can't get enough doctors into the GP surgeries. My GP doesn't work on Friday, it's his day off. But he's always there because he can't get GPs in to work the practice without paying horrendous circumstances.
Yeah, I think this takes up your point, Jude, that the system, the national health system itself, is very sick. So the scenario when you get, and this happens probably a couple of times a year, a very senior consultant who becomes a whistleblower, alerts the authorities to a state of affairs in which he or she feels that the patient's needs are no longer being served by how the ward or whatever it is organised, and then inevitably what happens is that person gets put on gardening leave, silenced, and then eventually gagged. Is made to kind of leave, then they can't work, and they're not actually allowed to say anything about what happened. So it just kind of, it doesn't, these are consultants who are highly trained, highly efficient, who know their work, but they're not actually allowed to make recommendations that are heard by the middle management, senior management. I think the problem is in the non-clinical staff. Because I think clinical staff, people are called to do that kind of work with the very best of intentions. But there's something very weird that goes on in the, let's call it the political echelons of the business.
And not just in this country, worldwide.
We're going to start talking about drug companies in a minute, aren't we?
No,
Okay.
we're so not. Have you got any questions? Sorry, Les.
No, I was just going to say that I think while health is it's a political potato really, and I think that's what makes it sort of so hard really about trying to get anything sort of sorted, because the political parties just play it off really, and we don't put a huge amount of resources into healthcare in this country. My gut feel is if we went out and sort of said to the vast general public, would you be willing to pay a little bit more? I think the majority of people would say yes, if they got a slightly better sort of service, really. But I've been a medical manager as well, and that was quite an eye-opener, because they're the same sort of stress and pressures that are in the clinical arena are in the management arena, and I think while it's a political potato at the top level, it just permeates down really, because everyone is trying to do, I think, fundamentally a good job, but they're all
we don't treat each other very nicely.
Well, I think it's very easy for the clinicians to get into battle or be perceived in battle with management and vice versa, and I don't think that's helpful, because everyone is there supposedly for the patient and the service, and it's very easy to play it off that if only the management did this, or if only the clinicians did this, really. But how we've got into junior doctors striking, it's a very sad situation, I think.
Well, the level of collective frustration, and it's not just with the junior doctors.
No.
It's with the emergency services. It's with people who serve. We don't honour people who serve. We honour people who manufacture
Do we have
something.
unrealistic expectations? Do we expect too much from the NHS? I see so much waste, and I spend quite a lot of time in various hospitals, and I just see so much waste on a day-to-day basis. I do believe the doctors, the consultants, and all the medical staff are doing an excellent job with limited resources, but I just see so much waste, huge waste of resources. And if that's at the hospitals I'm going to, that must be multiplied by all hospitals around the country.
Is it waste of bed space, or waste of operating theatres, or waste of
I
equipment?
don't know about the operating theatres, but certainly resources, whether it's people, space, time, just goes on and on forever.
But I think if you've got a sick, stressed system, then that will affect efficiency and productivity, because if you're not feeling valued and other people aren't feeling valued, then the systems you work in and what you're there for isn't valued, etc., and it just goes on, so no one takes responsibility, and you end up with this sort of battle with it, and I think that's why some of these things happen really, whereas I think if you go to organisations where there's good sort of team working, good leadership, and everyone common purpose, etc., and people are feeling valued, you get that extra 10% out of someone.
I think it's hugely easy to criticise. So easy, and it fragments. I think it's also something that it's the onus of responsibility is for us to be able to tell our truth in the most fundamental way without feeling that we are being a dictator or being a victim. It's something we were talking about the other day. We quite strongly disagree with each other sometimes, and we have a, I don't know, monthly, is it? Or bi-monthly board meeting. And it's pretty fundamental stuff, but it's never unpleasant. It always goes along with a laugh. We can teach people to do that. And when people are able to do that, a huge amount is achievable. And I think that's where we need to be heading at the moment.
I think it's very hard working in a system where you're not feeling valued, because you're getting into self-preservation, which means that you've got no energy to look after Joe Bloggs, and everyone starts sort of feeling, well, everyone's just out for themselves. And I think a lot of the organisational issues about the health service, for those who are working in it, it feels like that at the moment. I've got to look after myself. I haven't got any time or energy or resources to look after anyone else. And I think that's when it starts to fragment, really. And it becomes unpleasant. It doesn't become a joy to go to work. It feels something that you have to get through as opposed to sort of want to be there. And I think when that starts happening, the rot's in the system. And it was no surprise to a lot of health professionals when the Stafford stuff came out, the inquiry. That was no surprise. And how could that happen? That people could be left to drink out of vases. Actually, if you read anything about organisational sort of systems and things, if you've got a sick sort of system, all these things will happen.
And I think a lot of it comes back to what you spoke about in the beginning, about the power of speaking and being heard. And if I work in schools, and if you're working in a system where you're trying to speak to your line manager or middle managers and you feel no one's listening, no one's hearing you, then again, at that fundamental level, there's so much potency in hearing yourself speak your words, your truth to somebody and have them receive it. I mean, as you were talking about the bridge, this is the potency where the healing comes in of healing these systems, of us being able to speak and to disagree with somebody, but for them to say, okay, I hear you.
Well, people will hear you when you speak because all your levels match.
Yes, yeah.
So you have a harmonious ability to communicate. But people can shout, scream and yell and rant, rave.
Yes.
But if all of them aren't in alignment, no one will hear them, let alone take any notice.
Yes.
It's really interesting that if you ask patients or the public what they want from their doctor, it hasn't changed. It's always, I want someone who listens to me. It's always been number one. And it always will be number one, I think.
You say you don't feel valued. I take it by the system as a whole, but do you also mean by the patients themselves? Do you still feel valued by them? Or is your role kind of somehow shifted in the psyche?
I think by and large I feel valued by clients, patients, because I think I think it is a privilege to have someone come in and share something with you, actually, that they may not have spoken about sort of to someone else, or they've stored it up, or they value you, so that's why they've come. But I think when you're not multitasking, but when you're so busy covering lots of different sort of bases, you can forget about that, actually, or miss the message, or miss the connection, or the feeling that someone is sort of valuing you.